recording. How's it going? In this video, I'm going to go into another one of my theory videos. And in this video, I'm basically just going to go over what I've already kind of talked about, but it kind of hits it at a different angle. So I'm going to, you know what, this would be a good example to use as a pyramid. Maybe that's why that there's so many references back to the pyramid when you start dealing with, the knowledge of the universe and of existence. And the reason I'm going to use this shape as an example is just because it's so iconic, and it's basically around the same shape of what I was going to explain of the attribute and the nature of how God is. So this is a really good representation of how God exists. So the reason that this is a good representation of how God exists is because everyone always thinks so square-minded in, step one, step two with the Creator, and then they forget to realize the nature and dynamic of his reality. Alright, so the revelation of the Creator is he always gets smarter. Okay, so that's how the only reason we exist is because he always existed. So basically, what you're looking at is if you perceive the moment in time where we are, so just perceive that the moment in time that we are at is, let's just say, right here, because that's the present. So we have come to understand that no matter how far back you want to go, you can always go back further. And that's what's so hard to understand, is thinking, oh, you can always go back in time further and further and further. There is no point that you can reach to where, oh, it just started, or everything just started beginning. Because there isn't a point of where everything began. So that's what makes it so confusing. So in a sense, you're looking at the nature of God is through his nature of always existing. What happens is, since he always existed, boom, he always reaches a point to where he figures everything out. So after that point, after you get past that point of where he figured everything out, that's where everything gets confusing, is because we're here, but the Creator figured everything out relatively not too long ago, because if at any point he figures everything out, it would be as if he just figured everything out. So from what we understand is, no matter what, the further back in time you go, God gets stupider because he always learns more. Except for the point this is the most critical point of which is so hard to understand. So between the point of when he figured everything out to the current point, nothing ever changes. It's always the same. So between the point of now and until the point of when he figured everything out, that's where nothing changes. So everything's always the same. So only until you reach the point of where he just figured everything out, that's where the nature of reality gets back to the dynamic of the way things were. They always were like that. So before you reach that point of where he figured everything out, if you just keep going back further and further in time, the creator always gets stupider and stupider and stupider and stupider because he always existed, and that's how he knows everything is because the longer he exists, the smarter he gets. So since he always existed, boom, he reaches the point of knowing infinite amounts of knowledge. So this whole time, everyone's wondering, well, what's taking him so long? Well, the only way to create everything is after he figures everything out. Okay? So he can't ever do anything until he figures everything out. So for infinite amounts of time, he didn't know enough. He didn't know everything to do anything. So that's his nature. He won't do anything unless he knows everything. So for infinite amounts of time, you're dealing with him just figuring everything out because that's our nature. Nothing's ever going to be able to do anything if somebody doesn't do it. So if somebody doesn't do anything, nothing's ever going to happen. So why do you think this whole time everyone's wondering, well, what the fuck took so long? Is because, well, you would have never been able to figure everything out. Okay, so why are you trying to rush someone or something that actually was able to figure everything out? If you can't ever figure everything out, then who are you to say how fast or how slow somebody is of figuring it out? So now I haven't even really began to get into the concept. So now we know that between this point and this point, the point of where we're at and the point of when he figured everything out, nothing ever changes for the creator because he doesn't have to do anything after he figures everything out. Once he figures everything out, there's nothing else to do. So between that point and the point of when he figured everything out, nothing changes. It's always the same. Now, if you go before the point of when he figured everything out, that's when nothing's ever happening. Because he's figuring you need to concentrate in order to figure everything out. Why do you think he had to use such high levels of amounts of concentration and focus in order to figure everything out? Because he can't do anything besides, simulate infinite amounts of knowledge for infinite amounts of time and before it finally, boom, makes sense. So now, why did I use the shape of a pyramid to explain this? The reason I was going to use this shape in particular, and then at the beginning of the video I decided to turn it into a pyramid, is because I was going to use the shape of a waterfall as to kind of describe how the creator is. So I'm going to show you guys two different pictures. So the picture right here that I just drew on the right, that looks like 3 lines, that's just a picture of a waterfall. So now you can see why I used a pyramid to represent the creator as opposed to just using a waterfall, since everyone's more familiar and everyone's seen the shape of a pyramid and it's more symbolic. So either way you want to look at it, you can basically consider and perceive that, okay, well, if God were to be a waterfall, that's what makes him so mysterious, is because God exists in a way where, like, it doesn't make sense. It's hard to understand. Okay, so let's just say, for a point of reference, we're down here. So remember, when you're looking at a waterfall, it's something that falls down, and then you're normally at the bottom of it. So let's just say that, okay, we're right here. So that little stick figure right there, that's a person. Okay, let's just pretend that this is a person. There's his legs. Okay, this is a person at the bottom. So when we're looking up at God, we're always thinking, oh, where's the top of the waterfall? But that's what we're starting to realize and understand, is when you deal with God, there isn't a top. You can't reach a top. You can't reach a point. There's no point. So everyone automatically expects that, oh, when I look up to God, that there's going to be a plateau. There's a top. Because there has to be a top. But that's the thing. There isn't a top. You can't. So you're basically, when you're looking up at God, it's the same thing as looking up at a waterfall that just always goes up. There isn't a top. You can't reach the top because it's always going to keep going up further. So that's what's so confusing about God is he never began. So you're trying to perceive a waterfall that has a beginning. Oh, that's where it begins to fall over the cliff. But that's not how God works. There isn't a cliff. There isn't a top. You can't reach a top. Okay? So what that means is, so everyone's always so worried about, oh, is God going to run out of power? Is he going to run out of energy? And that's why he doesn't run out of power. That's why he doesn't run out of energy. So everyone's always sitting there freaking out like, oh, is he going to run out of power? Is he going to run out of energy? So everyone's wondering, where does he get all his power? Where does he get all his energy? So that's the same thing as everyone wondering, well, where does the waterfall come from? How does the waterfall just exist? How is the waterfall just there? But that's what we fucking had to discover and realize is that's God's nature. Is nobody created the waterfall, okay? And the waterfall doesn't run out, okay? Because it's always there. So when everyone's always looking at our existence, they're realizing, oh, energy always exists. It's always there. It's because that's God's nature. Energy is always there. So when everyone's wondering, like, oh, are you going to run out of energy? Are you going to run out of power? He's trying to explain to everybody, like, don't worry about running out of energy. Don't worry about running out of power. We have infinite amounts of power. So why do you think he never runs out of power or never runs out of energy? Is because he's a waterfall that doesn't have a beginning. So you're looking at a stream of water, a stream of life that has infinite amounts of, basically water. And everyone's wondering, oh, well, the water's going to run out because there's only so much water that can come from the top. But everyone keeps forgetting that there isn't a top. You can't reach the top. It's always there. So energy doesn't run out because it's always there. So that's the revelation of the Creator. He's basically a waterfall that is continually falling down and it never ends. But the thing is, everyone's all wondering, like, well, it had to have come from somewhere. Yeah, where do you think it came from? All this energy came from back here. So what you're looking at is all the energy that's down at the bottom that you're looking at. Where did it come from? It came from back further. Because you can always go back further and further, and that's where the energy comes from. It comes back from as far as you want to go. So when everyone's wondering, well, where does the energy come from? Where does the power come from? It comes back from as far as you want to go. As far back as you can perceive. That's where it comes from. So that's the revelation of God. He's basically a waterfall that doesn't end, and it's always going to keep falling further and further and further. And there's no bottom. But the thing is, there's no top, there is no bottom. But the thing is, why everyone's so confused is that we're perceiving it to where we can see that the water is still falling. Oh, there's more energy, continually falling. And it's always going to keep falling, and there's always going to be more falling. So we're always going to be perceiving it like, oh, there's more energy falling coming from wherever you perceive it to come from. So that's the revelation. So what this all means and what this ties into is it's the yin and the yang is when you reach a point to where a question doesn't matter, then there's no point in even asking the question. So it's the same thing as like when you reach the point of where you know that like somebody trying to say, well, where does the energy come from? There isn't a point. There's no point in asking that question because we already have the answer. We already know the answer. So that's like basically asking a question for no reason. So for example, what that means is it you have to invert everything to the opposite. What would be the opposite of if there's infinite amounts of energy? If there's no energy. So what would be the opposite of this phenomenon? The opposite of this phenomenon it would be to ask, why is there no energy? But the problem with asking a question like that, saying, hey, why is there no energy, is stupid, because if there was no energy, you couldn't even ask the question to begin with. So there's no point. There's no point in asking, why is there no energy, if there's not any energy. So only if there wasn't no energy would there be a point to ask the question. But we already know that there's already energy. So it's the complete opposite. So the revelation is there. You will always be able to reach a point to where you can ask a question that's stupid, that merits no use, no value. Why would you ask a question of why is there no energy when we already know that there is energy? So you can't even ask that question of why is there no energy when there already is energy. So you can't even ask the question of why is there no energy when there's already energy. There's no point because it's inconceivable. You can't. It's something you can't conceive. That's like trying to conceive a theory or an idea and you don't exist. How can you conceive a theory or an idea but you don't exist? The only way you can conceive a theory or an idea to begin with is if you even exist. So if you even begin to exist, then you're not even going to ask that question, which is the same thing about this phenomenon of if it already exists, you don't even need to ask the question. If so the revelation of God is everyone's asking, how did you always exist? Why did you always exist? So that's the same thing as asking somebody is, how did you spend your money, or why did you spend your money? So for God, he could explain how he spent his money and why he spent his money, but it's always going to turn out being the same thing. That's like saying, why did you travel north? So if you ask somebody, why are you traveling north? There's only so many answers you can tell somebody of how you travel north or why you travel north. So if somebody asks you, why did you travel north or how did you travel north, there's only so much you can explain before you're going to reach a point to where there's no point in explaining any further. Why did I go north? Because that's all there is to it. If somebody decides to go north, then they decide to go north. There's nothing else very much to it. So when everyone's asking, how did he always exist? It's the same thing as asking, how did you go north? So he could explain how he always existed, and he can say, okay, well, at this point I went left, at this point I went right. But the problem that you have with him explaining on how he went about doing everything is it'll never end. He'll always just say, oh, well, I went left, I went right. I went left, I went right, I went left, I went left, I went left, I went right, I went left. And then you're never going to reach a point to where he's never going to keep saying that, oh, well, then I went left, and then I went right, and then I went left, and then I went right, and then I went left. So it defeats the purpose of asking, why did you go north? After there's basically when someone's going to explain to you, well, why did I go north, or why did I go left, or why did I go right, is they're basically saying, well, when I went left, then that was the pathway that made most sense. So all he's going to keep explaining is, oh, well, when I went left, it made the most sense. Oh, and then also when I went right, it made the most sense. So he's just going to backtrack on everything he did and just confirm, well, yeah, I went left cuz it made the most sense to go left, cuz if I would have went right, maybe there was a cactus there. So why would I go right if there's a cactus here? So he'll be like, oh, well, I went left because there wasn't a cactus here. And then you're always going to reach a point where he can always keep saying, oh, well, I went right because there wasn't a cactus there. But the thing is, he can always keep explaining infinite amounts of where did he come from and where is he going, because he always existed. So when you're trying to explain, when you're trying to have him answer, where did you come from, you can't reach a point of where did he didn't come from one specific point. He came from everywhere, because he's always been going everywhere. So you can't reach a point to where it began. That's why everyone is driving themselves crazy. There's no point in asking a question that self defeats the purpose. It self defeats the purpose in asking that type of question. Where does the energy come from when it's already there? If it's already there, then it's there. Nothing can change that, okay? So it's a self-defeating purpose. It's basically you're asking a question that you shouldn't even have to ask, or it's a question you can't even ask. It's the same thing as looking at the opposite. If you didn't exist, it's like if you can't even ask the question, then it defeats the purpose. That's why it defeats the purpose, is because we already see, okay, well, if the energy's already there, then it defeats the purpose. It defeats the purpose to go against the way it is. So a better way to perceive it is, if the way things were is that nobody existed and nobody knew anything, then nobody can go against that. Nobody can challenge that, because that's just the way things are, because it defeats the purpose. Who's ever going to try to change the way things are if that's the way things are? How is anyone ever going to change the way things are if that's the way things are? Because if somebody wants to be against something always being the way something is, that doesn't change the fact that it's always going to be the way it is. It goes both ways. If nothing ever existed, nothing's ever going to change the fact that nothing is ever going to exist, or nothing ever did exist, because it defeats the purpose. There's no purpose. So if there's no purpose, there's no purpose. So now we've understood, we're on the other side of it. That it defeats the purpose to ask a question if it's not what the way things are, or if it's what happened. So basically the revelation of God is, that's what's always been happening. So when you're asking him, how did you always exist? He's just going to tell you that's just what happened. That's just what's been happening. That's just the way it is. So there is no other explanation. There is no other answer. So it goes both ways. If nothing existed, and if anybody wanted to ask the question, well, why the fuck doesn't anything exist? It defeats the purpose. That's the answer. If nothing exists, then nothing's ever going to change that. Nothing exists because nothing exists. So why does everything exist? Everything exists because everything exists. Nothing's going to change that. So it's a phenomenon of fucking nature. I think I hit all the angles that I was trying to hit there with this. But yeah, it's a self-defeating purpose, because it's if the coin lands on one side or the other, nothing's gonna change what side it's on. So the only thing that matters is looking at, well, what side is it on? So now we've seen what side it's on. Well, everything exists, and nothing's gonna change the fact that everything exists, because it's a self-defeating question to go against the way things are. Because if that's the way things are, who's ever going to change it? No one's ever going to, unless somebody changes it, unless you can change it. So it's a self-defeating question. It's basically a question that isn't supposed to be questioned. It's not supposed to be possible. It's not even supposed to be fathomable to ask that sort of question. It's like trying to ask a question of having a perspective of existence, but you don't exist. How can you have a perspective of existence if you don't exist? You can only have a perspective of existence if you exist. That's all there is to it. So basically, don't ask that question. It's stupid, because you're basically just trying to call somebody a liar if you try to say, well, that's not true. That doesn't make sense. So if you try to call God a liar by saying, oh, that you didn't just always happen to be there, or you didn't just always happen to exist, you're calling him a liar. But we know that, how could anybody lie about that? Why would anybody lie about that when it's obviously the way things are? Okay, it would make sense that we could maybe come at him like, hey, you're lying, if he didn't make himself so wise and so smart. If everything didn't look like it always made fucking sense, we might be able to ask the question of like, hey, how do we know that you even are able to make sense of anything? But the thing is, it's obvious that he's able to make sense of everything because everything makes fucking sense. So it defeats the purpose to say, hey, nothing makes sense when everything makes fucking sense. It's a self-defeating... It's stupid. It's stupid to ask a question of how does God always exist if the result has already occurred. So that's what you have to look at. Well, if the result has already occurred, nothing can change that. So you just have to look at, well, what is the result that has occurred? So we already saw, oh, well, the result has already occurred. Nothing can change that. So, yeah, asking God, how do you always exist, or why did you always exist, is stupid, because it's his answer is just going to be because that's what happened. Because that's the way it was. That's the way it always has been. Okay, you can demand that you want more answers, but nothing's going to change the fact that, if you ask a stupid question, you're never going to get a good answer out of something that is a stupid question. So that's a stupid question. How did you always exist? Or why did you always... Don't get me wrong. Remember, no question is really stupid, but it becomes stupid when it becomes redundant and ignored. Because this is the type of situation that God deals with all the time, where he has to explain how he always existed and why he always existed. And that's fine. That's part of our nature. We want to understand that. But when he explains it and he shows everybody, and then we refuse to believe him, and we refuse to understand it, now there's a problem. Because when you refuse to understand and you refuse to believe that, oh, he always existed, you're calling him a liar, because he's coming straight to your face and he's telling you, hey, this is the truth. This is what happened. And now you're trying to say, oh, prove it. Show me. I don't believe you. How is he ever going to be able to prove that he always existed unless you always existed with him? Or unless you give him enough time to make it obvious enough that he actually knows enough. And that's what this is all about. He has to prove that he knows everything and that he always existed. Because everyone was always so worried that it wasn't possible. It's not possible to always exist. It's not possible to always have infinite amounts of energy. So now he had to make sure that everybody understands that it's just the way it is. And that's just the way it is. And that's just the way it would have been if it would have been the opposite. You are not even going to be able to argue with if it would have been the opposite. So same with how it is now. There is no argument. There's no way to argue against the way it is, the way things happen, the way things are, because it's the way things are. So you guys you basically are all in serious trouble, because what's happening right now is God is disappointed. He's disappointed with everybody because you people didn't believe him. You didn't believe that he always existed, but you people should have known that there's no other explanation. You people know that. There's no other explanation behind this shit. Okay? And why do you think he's so disappointed that he had to go down to this level in order to show everybody the truth? And you know what? He has all the time in the world to sit there and wait till your asses figure it out. So guess what he's doing? He's gonna sit there and let your asses wait until you figure it out. Okay? Because he has all the time in the fucking world until this shit gets straightened the fuck out. Until people understand this concept and people don't doubt it. Alright? Why are you people doubting this shit? Why the fuck would you doubt something that's so fucking obvious?